I found HOA cops on my vineyard. They had no idea I wasn't in their HOA. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today's story is filled with unexpected twists, powerful emotions, and a shocking truth that no one saw coming. What begins as an ordinary situation will quickly turn into a dramatic confrontation, forcing the characters to make choices that could change their lives forever. Make sure you stay with us until the very end, because the final outcome may completely surprise you. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our latest stories. Your support helps us continue creating more emotional, meaningful, and unforgettable videos for you. We would also love to hear from you. What time is it where you are watching right now, and which city or country are you watching from? Please share your answer in the comments below. It is always wonderful to see viewers joining us from different parts of the world. Thank you for being here. Now, let us begin today's story. Take one more step and you'll be trespassing on your own land, the man in the black uniform said, and for half a second, I honestly thought I had misheard him. It was 6:12 on a Thursday morning, the kind of cold Napa Valley dawn when fog settles between the vineyard rows and every grape leaf shines with silver moisture. I had been checking the eastern irrigation line when the first engine growled beyond the ridge. Then came the crunch of tires over private gravel, slow and deliberate, followed by yellow lights sweeping across the vines. 3 dark SUVs rolled through my open service gate like they had done it 100 times. The lead vehicle stopped beside the pump shed, its right front tire pressing directly over a blue irrigation hose. I heard the plastic split before I saw the water. A sharp crack, then a hiss. Cold water sprayed across the dirt and soaked through the bottom of my work boots. 4 men stepped out wearing matching charcoal uniforms, polished badges, utility belts, and shoulder patches that read Briar Glen Community Enforcement. One of them was already questioning Lewis, my vineyard foreman, beside the sorting barn. Another had planted himself in front of Lewis's truck and was demanding identification. The tallest man turned toward me. His nameplate read Dale Rourke. "Stop where you are," he ordered. His voice carried cleanly through the fog. Behind him, the old bronze harvest bell hung beneath the barn roof, perfectly still. I looked past Dale toward the eastern boundary, where a weathered stone marker stood between 2 rows of Cabernet vines. My grandfather had set that marker in 1974. According to the county survey, Briar Glen Estates ended more than half a mile downhill from it. These men were not near HOA property. They were standing in the center of mine. "Who opened my gate?" I asked. Dale glanced at the other uniforms as though I had asked something irrelevant. "This property falls under Briar Glen compliance jurisdiction. We're conducting an authorized inspection." Water from the broken hose reached his boots and turned the dust around them into dark mud. He looked down with irritation, as if my vineyard had inconvenienced him. "Authorized by whom?" I asked. He tapped the badge on his chest. It was shaped like a sheriff's star, but the metal looked too bright and the lettering was too small to read from 10 feet away. "You need to shut down all agricultural equipment and provide access to the storage buildings," he said. "Failure to cooperate may result in detention until county law enforcement arrives." That was when I noticed the camera mounted high on the water tower, its small red status light blinking through the fog. It had a clear view of the gate, the vehicles, the uniforms, and Dale's tire sitting on my ruptured irrigation line. I reached into my jacket slowly and pulled out my phone. Dale's hand rose. "Keep your hands where I can see them." I stopped and studied his face. He expected fear. What he got was silence. Then I looked at the stone boundary marker behind him and said, "Before you threaten to detain me, Officer Rourke, you might want to learn exactly where your authority ends. My name is Wesley Calloway, but everyone who worked the vineyard called me Wes. I was 43 years old, and Calloway Ridge had been part of my family longer than I had been alive. My grandfather bought the first 40 acres in 1974, back when the eastern slope was nothing but dry grass, scattered oak trees, and soil most people considered too rocky to be useful. He saw something different. He saw drainage, morning sun, and a wind pattern that kept mildew off the vines. He planted the first Cabernet rows by hand, using wooden stakes he cut himself and a borrowed tractor that stalled every time the engine got hot. My father expanded the property 20 years later, added the crush barn, rebuilt the well, and laid nearly 3 miles of irrigation pipe beneath the ground. By the time the land came to me, it covered 68 acres and carried every year of their work in its fences, roads, and vines. That was why I noticed small changes. I knew which gate sagged after heavy rain. I knew which pump made a low humming sound before the pressure dropped. I knew the eastern boundary by the shape of the stone marker and the twisted live oak 10 yards beyond it. Nothing on that property was anonymous to me. Even the old bronze bell hanging outside the crush barn had a history. My grandfather rang it at the start of every harvest, and my father rang it on the final day, when the last truck left loaded with fruit. The sound traveled across the valley, deep and clean, and for a few seconds everyone stopped working to listen. The year before my father died, we stood beneath that bell after sunset with purple stains on our hands and the smell of crushed grapes hanging in the cool air. He told me the eastern strip would become valuable someday because Briar Glen Estates was spreading uphill. Then he made me promise not to sell it just because someone arrived with a polished offer and a confident smile. 3 years later, that person arrived. Her name was Priscilla Langford. She wore cream-colored slacks, expensive sunglasses, and shoes that sank into the soft dirt between the vines. She told me Briar Glen wanted 14 acres for a new emergency access road. Her first offer looked generous until I checked the numbers and realized the road would unlock a development worth millions. I declined. She raised the offer twice. I declined twice more. On her final visit, she stood beside the old stone marker and brushed dust from her sleeve as though the land had offended her. "Every property owner has a number, Mr. Calloway," she said. I looked across the rows my family had planted and told her, "This one does not." She smiled then, but there was nothing warm in it. "Boundaries change," she said before walking back to her white sport utility vehicle. Standing in the cold water from the broken irrigation line, watching Dale Rourke pretend his badge gave him power over me, I finally understood that Priscilla had not accepted my answer. She had simply decided to change the boundary herself. Dale held my gaze for 3 long seconds, then lifted his radio toward his mouth. The plastic casing clicked against the silver badge on his chest. "Control, we have a non-compliant property owner refusing inspection," he said. The word sounded official, but the radio answered with nothing except a burst of static. I looked at the 3 vehicles behind him. No county seal. No agency number. No government plates. Just magnetic door panels carrying the same Briar Glen emblem that appeared on Priscilla Langford's violation letters. Lewis stood near the sorting barn with his work gloves tucked into his back pocket, watching carefully. "Wes," he said, "they told me I could not leave until I showed them identification." Dale turned sharply. "We are authorized to verify everyone on the premises." "Authorized under which law?" I asked. The youngest man in the group shifted his weight. His nameplate read Trent Bellamy. Unlike Dale, he did not look comfortable. His eyes kept moving from the broken irrigation hose to the camera on the water tower. Dale stepped closer, stopping just outside the stream spreading across the dirt. "Briar Glen contracted our company to enforce community safety standards. You are obstructing an active compliance operation." "What company?" He pointed toward the patch on his sleeve. "Briar Glen Community Enforcement." "That is not a company name." His jaw tightened. I raised my phone and took a photograph of his badge, his nameplate, and the vehicle behind him. Dale lifted one hand. "Photography of security personnel during an investigation is prohibited." "By whom?" I asked again. He did not answer. That silence told me more than the uniform did. Real authority usually came with clear rules, jurisdiction, and paperwork. Dale had a polished badge and a rehearsed tone, but every time I asked for something specific, he hid behind another sentence. I walked slowly toward the lead vehicle, keeping both hands visible. On the dashboard sat a stack of yellow forms printed with the word citation across the top. The design looked almost identical to a county code notice. A black star appeared in the corner. Underneath it, in letters small enough to miss, were the words "Private Community Document." "You issue these to residents?" I asked. Trent glanced at Dale before answering. "For violations. And people think they're government citations." Dale cut him off. "Mr. Bellamy, return to your vehicle." Trent obeyed, but not before looking up at the blinking camera again. Then Priscilla's white sport utility vehicle appeared at the far end of the service road. It moved between the vines at a slow, careful pace, avoiding the mud her own patrol vehicle had created. She stopped beside the old stone marker and stepped out holding a leather folder against her chest. Cream coat. Dark sunglasses. The same controlled smile I remembered. "Mr. Calloway," she called, as though we had arranged a morning meeting. I hoped we could handle this professionally. The smell of her perfume reached me before she did, sharp and floral against the wet earth and sulfur spray. She opened the folder and removed a document bearing a stamped map. A thick red line ran straight through the eastern rows, across my pump shed, and up to the crush barn. "The community boundary was amended last month," she said. "Your agricultural operation now falls within Briar Glen's expanded management zone." I studied the paper without touching it. The county parcel number printed at the bottom was mine. The signature above it was not. "Who approved this?" I asked. Priscilla removed her sunglasses. "The board did. The board cannot vote my land into your association." Her smile narrowed. "That is a matter for attorneys. Until they decide otherwise, my officers will continue their inspection." I looked at Dale, then at the false citation forms, then back at the red line drawn over 3 generations of my family's work. Priscilla had not come to enforce a boundary. She had come to manufacture one. Priscilla gave us until noon to shut down every pump, tractor, and delivery vehicle on the eastern side of the property. At 12:15, Dale parked one of his patrol vehicles across the service road and began turning trucks away. The first driver was carrying empty harvest bins from a supplier in Santa Rosa. He called me from the gate while his diesel engine idled in the morning heat. "They say I need a Briar Glen access permit," he told me. "They also say they can cite my company." I could hear Dale speaking behind him in that same polished voice, repeating the words safety zone and authorized enforcement. I told the driver not to argue. The bins went back north, and my crew spent the afternoon stacking the few we had left beneath the barn awning. 2 days later, Priscilla's people placed a portable booth beside my gate. They photographed license plates, questioned tasting room customers, and handed yellow notices to anyone who refused to provide a name. The sharp smell of printer ink mixed with dust and warm grape leaves as those papers collected along the roadside. By Friday, our weekend reservations had dropped by half. One customer told Nora that a uniformed officer had warned her the Vineyard was operating under a safety investigation. Another said she had been asked whether she was transporting alcohol across restricted community property. Neither statement was true, but truth moved slowly when fear wore a badge. Then the complaint started. County Agriculture received an anonymous report accusing us of spraying chemicals without permits. The State Alcohol Office received another claiming our tasting room was serving outside approved hours. A fire inspector arrived after someone reported blocked emergency access, even though the only obstruction on the property was Dale's vehicle. Each inspection ended the same way. Our permits were current. Our records were clean. Our equipment passed. But every visit cost time, and time was becoming the one thing I could not replace. The Cabernet on the lower slope had reached 24 degrees Brix, and the forecast called for 3 days of heat. If we waited too long, the sugar would climb, the acidity would fall, and an entire season of careful work would flatten into overripe fruit. Priscilla knew that. On Monday morning, a courier delivered a thick envelope to the crush barn. Inside was a demand for $84,000 in retroactive assessments, enforcement fees, and daily penalties. Beneath it sat a purchase offer for the 14 eastern acres. The price was almost 40% below market value. A yellow note had been clipped to the front. Immediate sale will resolve all outstanding violations. I read it twice while the sorting line hummed behind me. Then I carried the papers outside, where Priscilla stood beside her white sport utility vehicle watching Dale inspect a delivery truck. "You are not enforcing rules," I said. "You are starving the business until I sell." She adjusted the cuff of her coat. "I am protecting a community from an uncooperative landowner. My harvest starts in 8 days. Then I suggest you make a practical decision before then." She turned toward the eastern rows, where sunlight flashed along the trellis wire. "That road is going through, Wesley. The only question is whether you get paid before it does." As she drove away, the tires passed within inches of the old stone marker. I looked down at the offer in my hand, then toward the vines my father and I had planted together. Priscilla believed the ripening grapes were a clock counting against me. She was right about the clock. She was wrong about who it was counting down for. The first hearing lasted 19 minutes, and Priscilla used every one of them better than I did. The county conference room smelled like old coffee, copier toner, and the lemon cleaner they used on the vinyl floor. I sat at one end of a long table with Nora and a land use attorney named Calvin Mercer. Priscilla sat across from us with Dale, 2 members of the Briar. Glen board, and a polished map mounted on foam board. A red boundary line cut through my eastern acreage as neatly as if someone had drawn it with a ruler. Priscilla spoke first. She described the vineyard as a disputed agricultural parcel affecting emergency access for more than 300 residents. She called Dale's patrol team a licensed community safety unit. She called the road through my vines an established evacuation corridor. Every false statement arrived wrapped in calm language and printed exhibits. When my turn came, I placed the original deed on the table and explained that Callaway Ridge had never joined Briar Glen. Calvin cited the county parcel record and challenged the board's authority. The hearing officer listened, adjusted his glasses, and asked whether either side possessed a recent certified survey. I had the deed. Priscilla had a stamped map dated 3 weeks earlier. That difference mattered. Until ownership and access rights are fully reviewed, the officer said, both parties will maintain the current operational arrangement. Current operational arrangement. For harmless words that left Dale's booth at my gate, his patrol vehicle on my service road, and my customers wondering whether they were entering a crime scene. Outside, a local reporter waited beneath the courthouse awning. Priscilla stepped toward the camera before I reached the sidewalk. "We are simply trying to protect families during fire season," she said. "Unfortunately, one commercial operator has chosen confrontation over cooperation." By that evening, the headline called me a vineyard owner blocking emergency access. The article included a photograph of Priscilla standing beside the red map. It did not include the deed in my hand. The next morning, 2 harvest workers failed to show up. One delivery company suspended service until the dispute was resolved. The lower Cabernet rows were climbing past 25 degrees Brix, and the fruit had begun to soften under the heat. I crushed one grape between my fingers. The juice felt warm and sticky against my skin. We had maybe 4 days before quality started falling. Then Raymond Sutter, who owned the orchard north of me, drove into the yard in his faded green pickup. He removed his cap and held it against his chest. "Wes, I saw 2 of those security men near your east line last night," he said. "They had shovels." We walked through the vines without speaking. The afternoon air smelled of dust, ripe fruit, and hot steel from the trellis wires. When we reached the boundary, the twisted live oak was still there. The stone marker was not. In its place sat a shallow patch of freshly packed earth, smooth enough to look deliberate. About 30 feet downhill, a new metal stake carried a bright orange ribbon. It shifted my property line toward the crush barn and placed the service road inside the boundary shown on Priscilla's map. Raymond pointed to tire marks pressed into the soft soil. "I watched them move something," he said. I did not know what it was until now. I crouched and ran my fingers through the loose dirt. Small flakes of pale stone clung to my palm. My grandfather's marker had not disappeared. Someone had dug it out, moved the line, and built a legal argument around the empty hole. Priscilla was no longer waiting for the county to decide where the boundary stood. She was rearranging the ground beneath the evidence. By sunset, the empty hole where the stone marker had stood was covered with a sheet of plywood and a blue tarp. I did not want rain, boots, or another shovel disturbing what was left. Raymond signed a statement at the kitchen table while Nora photographed the tire tracks and pale chips of stone caught in the soil. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the dry scratch of Raymond's pen. Nora read his statement twice, placed it in a folder, and looked at me over the rims of her glasses. "Your grandfather kept better records than most county offices," she said. "The problem is remembering where he hid them." That sentence pulled an old memory loose. When I was 12, my father had replaced 3 walk boards in the crush barn floor. Grandad stood nearby holding a narrow metal tube and told me some papers mattered too much for a desk drawer. I had not thought about that moment in 30 years. We crossed the yard with flashlights while the last daylight faded behind the ridge. Inside the barn, the air smelled of oak, dust, and the sweet beginning of fermentation from a test batch near the wall. I found the repaired boards beneath an old bottling table. Their nail pattern was different from the rest. Lewis brought a pry bar, and we lifted the first board carefully. Beneath it sat a rusted tin cylinder wrapped in waxed cloth. My hands went still when I saw my grandfather's initials scratched into the cap. Inside were 3 rolled surveys, a county letter from 1974, the original agricultural buffer agreement, and a water rights map marked in blue pencil. The paper felt dry and brittle, but the ink remained sharp. The certified survey placed the eastern boundary exactly where the missing stone marker had stood. The buffer agreement said no part of the vineyard could be absorbed into a residential association without the recorded consent of the property owner. No board vote could replace that signature. No management zone could be created around it. Then Nora unfolded a fire protection easement and tapped a line running beneath the service road. The blue irrigation pipe Dale's vehicle had crushed was not merely part of my vineyard system. It supplied a 10,000-gallon reserve tank used by the county during wildfire response. Damaging it had reduced emergency water access while Priscilla was claiming to protect the neighborhood from fire risk. The irony smelled almost as strong as the sulfur on my jacket. We carried everything to the office and compared the old survey with Priscilla's map. Her red line did not follow a road, fence, creek, or legal parcel. It followed the exact path needed to connect Briar Glen with land owned by Miles Harwood, a developer whose name appeared on 2 recent planning applications. At 11:14 that night, an email arrived in my inbox from an address I did not recognize. The subject line read Revised Access Schedule. It had been sent to me by mistake. The message was from Harwood to Priscilla. Once Callaway accepts the assessment settlement, we can record the road agreement and begin the 112-home expansion. Keep pressure on. Deliveries until after harvest. He cannot carry another season. I read those words while the old wall clock clicked above my desk. Then I remembered the camera on the water tower. Lewis pulled the recordings. At 2:38 the previous morning, headlights entered the eastern rows. Dale and another uniformed man stepped from a patrol vehicle carrying shovels. The image was grainy, but the old stone marker was clear. So was Dale lifting it from the ground and loading it into the rear cargo area. Priscilla had given me a false map. Harwood had given me their motive. Dale had given me the act itself. For the first time since those uniforms crossed my gate, the clock was no longer working against me. I did not call Priscilla that night. I did not send her the video, the survey, or the email from Harwood. Anger wanted speed. Evidence needed patience. By 8 the next morning, Calvin Mercer was sitting in my office with the tin cylinder open on the desk and a cup of coffee growing cold beside him. He studied the fire protection easement first, then the footage from the water tower, then Harwood's message. When he finally leaned back, the leather chair gave a low creak. "Do not stop them yet," he said. "Let them put their authority in writing." That was exactly what I did. I called Priscilla and told her I was prepared to discuss the 14 acres. I kept my voice tired. I mentioned the heat, the delayed harvest, and the cancelled deliveries. Silence held for half a second before satisfaction entered her tone. She suggested a formal site inspection on Friday morning, followed by an agreement signing at the crush barn. I told her to bring the full board, her enforcement team, and every document she claimed gave them control. By noon, Briar Glen had announced the event as a community safety review. Priscilla invited 2 local reporters, a county planning representative, and Miles Harwood himself. She thought she was arranging a surrender. I spent the next 2 days arranging a record. A licensed survey crew placed temporary markers beside the original coordinates without disturbing the empty hole. Nora delivered certified copies of the deed and agricultural buffer. Agreement to the county clerk. Calvin filed an emergency request to preserve the service road and all boundary evidence. Deputy Lena Brooks reviewed Dale's uniforms, vehicle markings, and yellow citation forms. Her expression changed when she reached the words "private community document" printed beneath the fake county seal. "They can provide security," she said. "They cannot represent themselves as law enforcement." The state licensing office confirmed that Dale's company was registered for private patrol only. No detention authority beyond what any private citizen possessed. No power to issue fines. No right to enter land outside its contract area. The fire marshal inspected the broken irrigation line and measured the pressure loss at the reserve tank. The damaged pipe had reduced emergency capacity by almost 1/3. He signed his report on the hood of his truck while water hissed from the temporary repair behind us. I installed 2 additional cameras near the crush barn and tested the microphone beneath the bronze bell. Every word spoken at the inspection would be clear. Then I placed the certified survey, the licensing report, the fire marshal's findings, and Calvin's court filing inside a heavy cream envelope. I sealed it and set it on the wooden podium Priscilla's staff had delivered for her announcement. On Thursday evening, Trent Bellamy appeared alone at the gate. He had removed his badge and carried his cap in both hands. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "Dale told us the county approved everything." His voice was low, almost lost beneath the hum of the pumps. "Did you move the stone marker?" I asked. He looked toward the eastern rows. "I drove the vehicle. I did not know what they were loading until afterward." He unlocked his phone and showed me a message thread from Priscilla. "Move the marker before sunrise. Once the road is established, Calloway will have no choice." I told him to preserve the messages and speak to Deputy Brooks before Friday. He nodded and left without putting his cap back on. At dawn the next morning, white chairs lined the crush barn, news vans waited beside the vines, and Priscilla's sport utility vehicle led a procession through my gate. Dale stepped out wearing his brightest badge. Priscilla walked toward the podium smiling at the cameras. Above her, the bronze bell waited in silence. So did I. Priscilla waited until every camera pointed toward her before placing both hands on the podium. Morning sun burned through the last of the fog, lighting the vineyard in long gold stripes. Behind her, Dale and 3 uniformed guards stood beside their vehicles with polished badges catching the light. Miles Harwood sat in the front row, one ankle resting over his knee, smiling like the road already belonged to him. "Today," Priscilla began, "Briar Glen is taking necessary action to secure emergency access for our residents." Her voice carried across the crush barn through the microphone I had installed beneath the bell. "Mr. Calloway has repeatedly refused cooperation, forcing the association to establish the correct boundary and assume temporary control of this corridor." Calvin stood 10 feet from me without moving. Deputy Lena Brooks waited near the rear doors with the fire marshal and 2 county officials. Priscilla had not noticed them yet. She lifted the red map for the reporters. The board authorized relocation of outdated boundary indicators so the property could reflect the amended community plan. There it was. Not a rumor. Not an assumption. Her own admission, clear enough for every microphone. I stepped toward the podium. You ordered the stone marker moved. Priscilla gave me the patient smile she used whenever she wanted an insult to sound reasonable. We corrected an inaccurate marker, Wesley. And Dale carried out that correction. Dale moved forward. This proceeding is under HOA control. Step away from the podium. Am I being detained? I asked. Several cameras turned toward him. He touched the badge on his chest. You are being instructed by an authorized officer. The rear doors opened. Deputy Brooks walked into the sunlight, her county uniform leaving no confusion about who held actual authority. No, he is not, she said. Dale's hand dropped from his badge. The Vineyard went silent except for the soft ticking of the irrigation system. Brooks stopped beside him and looked at the star pinned to his shirt. Mr. Rourke, your company is licensed for private security. You have no law enforcement authority on this property, no power to issue government citations, and no contract covering Callaway Ridge. Priscilla turned toward Miles, but his smile had disappeared. I broke the seal on the cream envelope. The first document was the certified 1974 survey. A county surveyor unfolded it beside Priscilla's red map and placed both on an easel. The difference was obvious. Her boundary crossed 60 feet beyond the legal parcel line and followed the route Harwood needed for his development. The second document was the agricultural buffer agreement. The county official read the controlling language aloud. No residential association could absorb any portion of the vineyard without the recorded consent of the owner. There is no such consent, he said. I handed the fire marshal his report. He explained that Dale's vehicle had crushed a protected water line supplying the 10,000-gallon wildfire reserve tank. Priscilla's supposed safety operation had reduced emergency water capacity by almost 1/3. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the podium. That was accidental. Moving the marker was not, I said. Lewis activated the screen inside the barn. The water tower footage appeared behind us. Dale's vehicle entered the vineyard at 2:38 in the morning. On the recording, he and another guard removed the stone marker and loaded it into the rear cargo area. A murmur moved through the chairs. Then Trent stepped out from beside Deputy Brooks. He held his phone in a clear evidence bag. I preserved the messages, he said. Brooks read the final one aloud. Move the marker before sunrise. Once the road is established, Callaway will have no choice. Priscilla looked at Dale. Dale looked at Harwood. Harwood stood and quietly moved away from the front row, but a county investigator was already waiting near the gate. I reached above the podium and pulled the rope beneath the bronze bell. Its deep note rolled over the vines, through the open barn, and down toward Briar Glen. My grandfather had used that sound to begin every harvest. That morning, it marked the end of Priscilla's authority. The bell's final note faded into the hills, and for the first time since the patrol vehicles crossed my gate, nobody from Briar Glen tried to tell me where I could stand. Deputy Brooks collected Dale's badge, citation forms, and vehicle records while the county investigator photographed Priscilla's map beside the certified survey. Miles Harwood left through the service gate without speaking. His development application was suspended before noon. By the end of the week, the county had opened formal investigations into trespass, fraudulent records, deceptive security practices, and interference with protected agricultural infrastructure. Priscilla resigned as HOA president 3 days later, although she called it a temporary leave in the letter she sent residents. The distinction did not last. Trent's messages led auditors into Briar Glen's financial records, where they found that Priscilla had used community funds to pay survey consultants, private patrol fees, and planning expenses connected to Harwood's proposed expansion. Homeowners who had believed they were financing neighborhood safety discovered they had been financing a private land deal. The entire board was removed at a special meeting held in the same clubhouse where Priscilla had approved my first penalties. Dale's company lost its Briar Glen contract, and the state suspended its private patrol license while investigators reviewed every citation it had issued. The yellow booth disappeared from my gate. So did the magnetic enforcement signs, the flashing lights, and the men asking customers for identification. The court issued an order confirming that Callaway Ridge had never belonged to Briar Glen and prohibiting the association from entering, regulating, or claiming any part of the property. The settlement paid for the damaged irrigation line, the lost deliveries, the legal expenses, and the fruit we could not save. We still lost part of the lower Cabernet block. Some grapes had gone soft in the heat, and no court order could put acidity back into overripe fruit. But Lewis and the crew harvested the rest under clear skies. The air smelled of crushed berries, diesel, and damp oak from the barrels waiting inside the barn. Nora stood beside the sorting table with purple juice staining her fingertips, smiling in a way I had not seen since my father's last harvest. Raymond brought the missing stone marker back in his pickup after investigators recovered it from Dale's storage yard. We reset it at the original coordinates under the supervision of the county surveyor. The old stone looked smaller than I remembered, but when the dirt was packed around its base, the entire vineyard seemed to settle back into place. 1 year later, I replaced the service gate with redwood salvaged from retired wine barrels. Beside it, I mounted a plain metal sign with 4 words, "Private Property. No HOA authority." Inside the crush barn, I framed one of Dale's false citations next to a copy of the certified survey. I kept them there as a reminder that confidence could imitate authority for a while, but it could not survive evidence. On the first morning of the next harvest, fog rested low between the vines. Lewis started the sorting line. Nora opened the barn doors. I wrapped my hand around the rope beneath the bronze bell and pulled. The sound rolled across all 68 acres, past the restored stone marker, over the repaired water line, and down toward the houses Priscilla once believed entitled her to my land. She had arrived with uniforms, flashing lights, and a red line drawn across a map. I had answered with patience, records, and the truth beneath her feet. Justice was never the loudest voice at my gate. It was the deed that proved who owned the ground.